I think if I had to make a shorthand estimate, at least half of my videos are videos about different ROM hacks and fan games, and while I have always spread out to other topics, I don't think I've ever wanted to stray too far from that because I enjoy it too much. Surprisingly though, I don't think I've ever made a video about ROM hacks as a broad topic, because I'm typically focused on a single ROM hack that I happen to enjoy. As of today, I've played conservatively probably 257 trillion ROM hacks and fan games spanning different base games, genres, and generations. I've been around the block and I've seen all kinds of things that you wouldn't believe. I saw Mr. Krabs in Pikmin. And because the scene has matured greatly over the years, ROM hacks have fluctuated dramatically in terms of just about everything. I've been thinking about what I would say if I was asked for a bunch of ROM hacks and fan games that I would recommend to anybody who was just getting into it. And today, I want to give you that list, or at least a version of it. I see new crazy things all the time, so the list is never really done growing. So this is the first edition of Phantom Beano's ROM hack fan game recommendation list. Now let's start with Super Mario World. People have been hacking this game since the Stone Age, you know what I mean? The ROM hack that I would recommend for this game in a heartbeat is A Plumber for All Seasons. This is one that I finally played last year after numerous requests, and it was probably one of the best that I'd ever seen. From a purely audio-visual standpoint, the game is a knockout. It goes far beyond what is typically expected of ROM hacks visually and even leverages some of that Mode 7 good to its advantage. The art direction is very deliberate and unique to this game, and off the top of my head, I can't really think of any other ROM hack that looks like it. I literally had to just stop and admire the scenery on several different occasions. And the music is incredible. It has such a consistently top-notch soundtrack that I actually like listening to it outside of the game. But even aside from all of that, I was also refreshed by how reasonable the difficulty was. I think even today, when a lot of people imagine ROM hacks, they're picturing something that is woefully unbalanced and demands a level of precision and immaculate skill from the player that isn't necessarily reasonable to expect from a random guy who's never done a half A press before. Plumber for All Seasons saves its most challenging stuff for the very tail end, but the difficulty curve is surprisingly consistent and gradual. If you have ever liked Super Mario World ROM hacks but somehow never played this one, you gotta do it, man, I'm telling you, just get on that shit. But then, there's my other favorite Mario World hack. Coronation Day, also known as is a Super Mario World ROM hack that I find to be brilliant, but not at all for the same reasons. This is not a traditional Super Mario World romp. This is more of a bizarre artistic experience. I played this game at the recommendation of the comment section a long time ago when I was looking for scary games to play for Halloween, and somebody mentioned this ROM hack comparing it to the Super Mario 64 ROM hack B3313, which I will definitely not talk about later. The gameplay of this hack primarily is walking through the level and letting it engulf you in its grotesquely unsettling atmosphere while dropping hints and clues as to what is going on. There are so many blink and you miss it details and little things you can do to learn just another little tiny piece of information, but the game never outright summarizes the premise to the player. It has its share of gory imagery and disturbing dialogue that is paced so well that when it shows up, it can be genuinely frightening and tremendously powerful. And that's the greatest thing about the story, is that it's never been fully explained, not even by the creators themselves, which leaves it open to interpretation, but also allows it to remain scary even after the game is finished. Since you always fear what you don't understand, a game that can never be fully understood can always be feared. On a lighter note, Mario 64. Now this is really what it's all about. The first ROM hacks I ever played were Mario 64. I played a million of these. You got your classics like Super Mario Star Road. Now that's a damn good one. It was one of the first that people considered to be worthy of succeeding the original and calling it Super Mario 64 2. Mario 74 is another classic from the same time period, but that game is much harder and will make you a lot more mad. And you can't forget about the Star Revenge collection. I mean, it's physically impossible because there's so many of them. But beyond that, the technology behind Mario 64 ROM hacks has risen so dramatically that it's no longer just new levels and music. We now have entirely new mechanics and systems. Serene Fusion has a ton of variety. It's the massive collaborative effort of tons of different ROM hackers who all have their own sensibilities and unique ideas. This is a very easy one to recommend. Last summer I played Beyond the Cursed Mirror, which is easily one of my favorites now. This hack has it all. It's got a new story with original characters, mystery, intrigue, even in a full official Mario game. That's not something you can take for granted. And then they go and add a badge system to the game where you can buy upgrades that tangibly help you in-game. There's even little stuff like how you can change your outfit. I was honestly just floored by how many new and original enhancements there were in that game. The hub world is also excellent. It's visually robust and intriguing while also being full of peculiar characters that you wouldn't expect from a Mario game. It's kinda like if you let the Paper Mario developers make a ROM hack. It's also surprisingly cinematic. You have cutscenes with brooding imagery and atmospheric soundtracks. The intro to this game is Mario walking through the rain while the names of the developers of the mod fade in and out of the screen. Kinda like a modern Prestige game. This is a ROM hack that is just full of surprises from beginning to end. It was a wonderful time. Now you can't really talk about Mario 64 ROM hacks without mentioning Kaze/Kazaa/ no matter how you pronounce it, somebody will tell you you're pronouncing it wrong, so just roll the dice. This guy was a big name when I started playing these things and he's still going strong to this day. He's currently working on Return to Yoshi's Island 64, I think. He's been on that shit for years. I can still remember when Last Impact came out. This hack was kind of revolutionary back then, and even though, by his own admission, he spent so much time with the custom coding and objects and not enough time making sure all the ideas were actually fun, it put on full display the potential of Mario 64 ROM hacks and all the weirdo shit they could pull off if you knew what you were doing. In today's context, Last Impact is almost like more of a proof of concept of just how malleable Mario 64's engine is and all the things you can add to it. Kaze's later work utilized custom code and characters just as much if not more than Last Impact, but arranged it in a manner that was far more conducive to fun gameplay rather than just showing off. One of my favorite examples is Peach's Fury. Now this game doesn't have the size or scope of the other hacks I just mentioned, but it turns out that's not a big deal. Because everything you see is super focused and super polished. You can blow through it in under an hour, but that's because there is not a single milligram of fat on this hack. You're just stumbling into one neat idea after another. If it's not already obvious, this is an homage to Bowser's Fury, which was a bonus game that came with the Switch version of Mario 3D World, which was an incredible brief Mario experience. It was basically one big continuous level, and that's kinda what Peach's Fury is supposed to be. The lighting and the texture work and even the little things like the coins are brought up to a much higher standard. It looks like it shouldn't even run on a Nintendo 64. It's a technical marvel of a ROM hack, not only looking better than Mario 64 ever did, but also being micro-optimized to such an extent that you can not only play it on original hardware, but it can even hit surprisingly high frame rates, even grazing 60. It's a short burst of ROM hacking perfection, and I can easily recommend it to anybody who hasn't played it before. But if you want something beefier, Kaze's own Mario 64 Land is closer to something like Mario 3D World. It has the efficient linearity of 3D World, but with the snappy handling of Mario 64, and it's super replayable thanks to some fun side objectives. I have no idea when Return to Yoshi's Island 64 is gonna be finished, but Kaze has already accumulated a pretty beefy portfolio, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that when it eventually gets finished, ROM hack fans are gonna be living real large. Alright, so do you remember when I said I wouldn't mention B3313? Yeah, I lied. B3313 is loosely based on the premise of Mario 64's personalization AI, and if you don't know what that is, it was a weird rumor slash meme slash urban legend that started a couple of years ago that suggested Mario 64 could change itself depending on the person who played it. The concept was often colloquially referred to by the phrase, "every copy of Mario 64 is personalized," which is not possible, or at least it wasn't. AI has made frightening progress lately, so theoretically I imagine something like it could exist, but Nintendo is too scared to try. B3313, not unlike Coronation Day, is not a ROM hack you play because you want a regular Mario 64 ROM. This is a hack you play because you want a weirdo, otherworldly experience. B3313 is very discomforting, but not at all for the same reasons as Coronation Day. Instead of hitting you with ambient horror soundtracks and gory imagery and chilling dialogue boxes, B3313 is a sprawling labyrinthine world that will make you feel like you are slowly losing your mind as you try to map it out in your head. It looks completely benign at first, like a weird beta recreation of Mario 64, until you walk into the wrong door and end up in a very strange room where the music sounds familiar but just a little bit off. Then you walk through one or two more doors out of a choice of 300 and end up in an even weirder room with an even more bizarre version of the song you're expecting. There is an overwhelmingly nightmarish undercurrent to the whole thing as you realize just how hopelessly lost you are in this stupid massive world where it feels like the very rules of the universe are changing before your eyes because they probably are. There are rooms that look nearly identical except for one or two subtle details that you can very easily miss, and one wrong turn will put you in a weird room with a faceless Mario or a dead Luigi. Every time I play this game again, I discover some new weirdo shit, which makes it something I can keep coming back to in search of something I haven't seen before. If you're familiar with LSD Dream Emulator for the PlayStation, it's kinda like that, but more sinister. B3313 feels very calculated. It's familiar with just the right amount of discomfort, which makes it feel very authentic to a nightmare. On a lighter note, again, Mario Kart 64. Now this is a game I have a ton of nostalgic attachment to. There have been a ton of great ROM hacks for this game, and one extremely good HD texture pack that must have taken 9,000 years to make. If I had to pick one favorite off the top of my head, it would have to be Amped Up. This game has gotten an avalanche of updates over the years, and it's still getting updated. This game is full of new features and stages. You got this death race mode where you can kill the other players like F-Zero, and this elimination mode where the player in last place is flat out eliminated. So you just keep going around until the last racer is standing. That's brutal. This ain't your grandma's Mario Kart. This is real life. People die. Purple coin challenges, kinda like Diddy Kong Racing. Ring challenges like Superman 64, everybody's favorite. 2D items are now way more 3D than ever before, and there are even a ton of unnecessary bonus features like the decals for drifting. New music, new graphics, new gameplay. It ain't just amped up, it's fucking ramped up, it's bamped up, it's samped up, it's hamped up, it's real good, and it's only getting better. Ocarina of Time, now that's a damn good video game. There was a time where I couldn't even imagine a ROM hack the size of the original game or even close to it, let alone more than one. Sealed Palace dropped last year, and it's still one of the biggest Ocarina hacks I have ever seen in my life. It took me 20 hours to beat it, which is just insane for a ROM hack, and I didn't even find everything. I can still remember when Ocarina hacks were like one new dungeon that took 20 minutes to complete. Even though Sealed Palace doesn't add much in the way of new enemies or bosses or items, it takes place in a whole new world and rearranges the otherwise pre-existing assets into a brand new experience to a far more effective extent than you might expect. And the story was also surprisingly good. It literally starts with you in prison and you have to break out. And 7 years later, you find one of the prison guards who recognizes you and freaks out, telling you he was just following orders. It goes to some dark places, which is always appreciated in a Zelda game. Sealed Palace almost feels like a darker reimagining of Ocarina of Time, following a lot of the same story beats in the same order, and in my heart, I like to think of it as the true Ura Zelda. Then there's Indigo. This is a ROM hack that is still in development. Last summer I reviewed a demo for this game and it was by far one of the most expansive and feature-rich demos for a ROM hack I have ever been a witness to. Right off the bat they hit you with this dramatic graphical upgrade with Link looking closer to his appearance in Twilight Princess, textures, lighting, fog effects, new enemies like albino redeads that can just bum rush you out of the darkness with no warning whatsoever. All converge into what is possibly the most terrifying Ocarina ROM hack you will ever play. At least when it wants to be. The overworld, the individual areas, the set pieces, I am just floored by the world building in this ROM hack that isn't even finished. On top of all of this, the game is full of new weapons and items that have no equivalent in the base game. I'm talking Rock's Feather, the anchor that you can swing around to destroy boulders. You get a sword dash move that lets you plow through the entire world sword first like a walking hitbox. New enemies even command a greater level of respect than the base game's enemies. I'm telling you, they will kick your ass and it is absurd. There is more content in this demo than some ROM hacks end up accumulating even when they're fully completed. The N64 already had 2 big dog Zelda games and it would have still been absolutely blessed to have had this on top of that. It truly is a labor of love. There is no other ROM hack like it, and when it's finished, it will be phenomenal. What else is there? How about GoldenEye? I feel like GoldenEye ROM hacks have always been in a bit of a weird place. There are a number of ROM hacks out there, but most of them are like 1 or 2 levels, or it's stuff like GoldenEye with Mario characters, which are all cool in their own right. But the GoldenEye ROM hack that always comes to mind first has gotta be Goldfinger 64, which of course is an adaptation of the film Goldfinger as GoldenEye adapted GoldenEye. This is an entire full-sized big GoldenEye campaign with all new content. I'm talking new weapons, sound effects, characters, locale. It takes the foundation of GoldenEye and turns it into what I imagine to be a very faithful adaptation of Goldfinger. And the reason I say imagine is because I must confess I still have not seen it. The game itself is very complete. Every level is distinct, both visually and audibly, with original music that is not heard anywhere in GoldenEye. And the all-new weapons with new sound effects that all feel very punchy and weighty. Shooting enemies in this game is incredibly satisfying. You even got the 3 difficulty settings, all with their own additional and often elaborate objectives, plus all the briefing info from your MI6 buddies. There are some minor mistakes, like how some levels are very difficult to navigate, but that could be said of the original game as well. Overall, this is the closest thing to GoldenEye 2 that isn't Perfect Dark, which is ironic because Goldfinger predates GoldenEye by several decades. But I'd say this hack is mandatory for GoldenEye fans based on that fact alone. What about Luigi's Mansion ROM hacks? Well, for a while they didn't really exist. They're a relatively recent phenomenon and one that I was afraid would never actually come to be. My favorite of these is definitely Halloween Haunt. This is a very brief experience that takes place in an all-new mansion that's really more of a regular house based purely on size. Luigi's Mansion ROM hacks often take place in a modified version of the original mansion, so it was a really cool thing to see an all-new area to explore. And in spite of its brevity, it's definitely worth playing. Another one that really stuck out to me is Luigi's Mansion Extra Tangy, which is a surprisingly nightmarish ROM hack that turns Luigi's Mansion from goofy slapstick E-rated scary to fucking weird scary. Like, for every single second you spend playing this game, you really feel like Luigi is going to die horribly any second. It's also surprisingly difficult, which only adds to the scare factor. It's always a great thing when the audio-visual tone of the game is further reflected in the gameplay itself, as it is here. Mario Sunshine is one of my favorite 3D Mario titles. The ROM hack scene for this one is still developing, but at least we got demos for things like Super Mario Sunshine Eclipse. As somebody who just really enjoys controlling Mario in this game, adding new levels to Mario Sunshine is a pretty safe bet. And with almost 30 shine sprites across a handful of levels, it's a very beefy demo on its own. Paper Mario. This is easily my favorite Mario spin-off series, and it's great to see a thriving ROM hack community after all these years. I literally used to pray for times like this. I think if I had to recommend one, it would have to be Paper Mario The Black Pit. This is a very deceptive ROM hack. The premise is that there are two pits of 100 trials, the regular pit and the roguelike pit, where you're dependent on items and upgrades that are randomly dished out floor by floor. That alone would have been incredible, but going through these pits only reveals more and more plot twists. What seemed at first like a funky, gimmicky hack very quickly turned into something way more ambitious than I could have predicted. Play this one, I'm telling you. BanjoKazooie ROM hacks. Now there are a lot of these. One of my favorites is definitely Jiggies of Time, which turns the world of Ocarina of Time into a huge sequence of BanjoKazooie levels. How is that even possible? Well, it should have been impossible, but somehow it wasn't. Obviously, a lot of liberties are taken to make the levels work within the context of BanjoKazooie, but the music and general locale are very familiar to those who've played Ocarina before. But another mod that I often remember is Banjo Dreamy, which almost turns BanjoKazooie into a Metroidvania. You start with 0 moves, not even the basic ones that Bottles gives you in the tutorial. You have to go through hell with no movement options besides walking and jumping 4 inches into the air, desperately looking for one more move at a time. It is a completely out of left field spin on BanjoKazooie that actually works remarkably well, and it's still completely unique amongst tons of other banjo hacks that continue to come out. Pikmin ROM hacks are getting big right now, the most popular base game being Pikmin 2, which is understandable. It has 5 different Pikmin varieties on top of the treasure system and the cave system, which gives it a lot of vectors for custom creativity. Pikmin 2 gives you a lot to work with. Pikmin 269 is one that I alluded to in the beginning, but as funny as it is, it's kinda hard to recommend to a newcomer just because of its trollish difficulty. It's easier to recommend something like 251. This came out a few years ago and has 251 treasures across heavily remixed Pikmin dungeons. It's got all kinds of new stuff and it's relatively reasonable difficulty-wise and even gives you a co-op campaign option. That's one thing that I keep wishing they would add to the actual Pikmin. And we cannot forget about Colossal Caverns. This is a ridiculous ROM hack that turns Pikmin 2 into one ginormous seed-generated dungeon with every single treasure and enemy in the game all on it at the same time. And yes, that does mean the Water Wraith can spawn anywhere and chase you to the ends of the earth. Titan Dweevil can just spawn right next to your base. The game doesn't give a shit, dude. This is endlessly fun. And finally, there's the Doom mods. You just can't not talk about Doom mods. Without Doom, I don't think the concept of video game modding really exists in the same way it does today, because they were some of the earliest examples of developers actively facilitating and encouraging community modding. I had a lot of fun with the Golden Souls trilogy, which turns Doom into a first-person 3D platformer collectathon with guns. But I also loved Zelda Doom, which is a beat-for-beat recreation of the original Zelda for the NES, but in first person, which, weirdly enough, fixed a lot of the problems that I had with the original Zelda. Navigation, controls, ancient jank, all of that stuff is surprisingly mitigated in this version. There's also Simon's Destiny, which is a love letter to the old Castlevania games and even contains an AVGN Easter egg.
That was some turkey.
But then there's MyHouse.wad. This is another one of those creative horror experiences where the very world changes as you play, and to understand the full extent of the story, you need to find a bunch of super hidden shit and solve some cryptic puzzles. It's surprisingly replayable with multiple different endings you can find. I would put this in the same category as something like Coronation Day or even B3313. It is a very impressive mod in pretty much every respect, and if you could call it a creepypasta game, it might be the best there is. There are obviously way more ROM hacks and mods and fan games out there beyond the ones that I mentioned, and with the communities growing by the day with new advancements being made on the regular, that number will only continue to increase. If I was asked which ones come to mind first out of the hundreds that I've played, this is a pretty hefty sample size. But it's worth mentioning that any mod or hack that I used as B-roll footage are great in their own right too, which is why I included the titles for each one. If I spoke at length about every single one of these that I enjoyed, I could be here for several hours, and it might get a little redundant because I already have videos on most of them individually. That being said, do tell me if there are any glaring omissions that I should have included. I mean, new ROM hacks come out all the time, so eventually I'll have to make another video like this anyway, right?